Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're excited to share with you that we are kicking off 2022 with 2 new NARM trainings starting soon in January and February of 2022. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for the Level 2 NARM Therapist training beginning on January 20th. This training will be offered in an online format and is designed to support mental health professionals who work with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Being trained in NARM, one of the first clinical models specifically designed to address adverse childhood experiences and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, supports therapists to learn how to address the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. If you are interested in this training, we encourage you to register now and reserve your spot. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/level2online. For all other helping professionals, we invite you to join us for the Level 1 NARM Online Basics training starting February 4th. This professional training is designed to support a basic foundation for addressing the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. It is designed for substance abuse counselors, educators, coaches, clergy, doctors, nurses, and other allied healthcare workers. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. We look forward to you joining our growing international NARM community and are inspired to work with you to bring NARM to your clients and communities in order to transform trauma. Today's episode is kind of a part 2 follow-up from way back at the beginning of the pandemic in April of 2020. Both episodes stand on their own, but if you'd like to hear more after today's conversation and you're a newer listener, you can go back and listen to episode 9. It's a really rich conversation, especially in union with what is discussed today, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, I'd like to introduce you to our host of NARM senior faculty who are joining us. Marcia Black is a licensed clinical psychologist, NARM senior training assistant, and NARM faculty committee member. Marcia has been in private practice for over 35 years in San Francisco and the East Bay area, specializing in treating complex and developmental trauma and other psychological conditions, including depression, loss, anxiety, relationship issues, and addiction. Stefanie Klein is a licensed clinical social worker, somatic experiencing practitioner, NARM master therapist, consultant, and faculty member. She has spent 22 years in her Los Angeles private practice, specializing in treating adults with trauma and anxiety disorders. She has been mentored by Dr. Lawrence Heller, founder of the Neuroaffective Relational Model, for over a decade, and has been honored to assist him in his U.S. trainings. Lastly, we have Brad Kammer. Brad is a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional clinical counselor. He is trained as a body-mind psychotherapist and is a somatic experiencing practitioner, consultant, and faculty trainer, helping to bring SE to various communities around the world. Brad is also a NARM master therapist, senior faculty, and training director, teaching NARM and working with complex trauma internationally. In this episode, Marcia, Stefanie, and Brad reflect on the last year and a half as they share what they're learning as NARM trainers and consultants. They also talk a bit about how the mission of the NARM Training Institute has continued forward and how they've witnessed it affect their students and community. Finally, we talk a bit about what has personally impacted us during the pandemic, as well as how we engage with NARM and experience post-traumatic growth during these times. I hope you enjoy this episode of Transforming Trauma. All right. Hello, friends, and welcome to Transforming Trauma. So the 3 of you recorded an episode at the very start of the pandemic. And Brad, you recently mentioned it would be nice for the 3 of you to come back together and to check in about your learning as NARM trainers and consultants and to share some of the highlights and learning and to reflect on how NARM is impacting the community and the NARM students. So I wondered where you would like to start with that.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Well, first, we just really want to welcome you. We're excited to start this new year with you at the helm of Transforming Trauma. You know, you and I met a few years back in Arizona, and just so happy that you've been part of our community, and I'm really happy to just have you part of the Transforming Trauma family now. So thank you for being part of this.
Thank you.
So, Marcia, Stefanie, and I, we met together on a podcast episode that came out almost 2 years ago now, right when COVID hit. I think it was March or April of 2020. And at that point, we were just trying to, like everyone, figure out where we were going. We had all these trainings we were doing in person. All of a sudden, of course, that wasn't going to be available. All three of us had clients that we couldn't meet in person with. And we were just trying to sort out what this was going to look like, and also how we could use NARM and what we do to support our growing community. So we just thought it would be kind of interesting to come back, and also fun for us because we love being together, the three of us. And again, it's fun to have you here too. Just to kind of check in, what have we been doing for these last 2 years? Where is this community at? What have we learned? What are the challenges with some of the growth that we've experienced? And we thought it would be useful and engaging to talk about that.
Fantastic. Anything you'd like to add on that, Stefanie or Marcia?
Well, I just want to say welcome myself.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
It's so nice to have you. And yeah, it's just a treat for Brad and Marcia and I to be able to be together and reflect. We're all so busy with this rapidly growing institute and community, and everybody is wanting to be so engaged that we don't get a lot of time to sit and reflect. So I'm looking forward to this, to sharing this, and also just to having it for ourselves.
Yeah, I would add that this period of time has had a profound impact on our clients, on our students, and on our trainings in ways that are expansive and in some ways have been incredibly positive, because we've been able to bring in so many more people. And we've added the OBT program, the online basics program, which is for non-therapists. And Brad, I'm sure you want to say a little more about that. But it's widened our community in unprecedented ways. So we'd love to share a little bit about how that's impacted us as trainers and our students in our community.
Beautiful. That leads really well right into the first question I had, which was really, I wondered how the three of you experienced the NARM community growth since almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty surprised with where we are and how the pandemic really forced us in a way to reimagine what was possible. And now we have 4 levels of our training where we used to have 2. And we're bringing in people now together from all over the world and from different allied helping professional backgrounds that to the level 1, to our online basics training, which is something that we didn't have the capacity to do before. Just incredible addition and making this world we're all going through the same thing right now, which is also so unprecedented that everybody in the world is part of the same collective trauma. And so to be able to come together, I mean, sometimes we have representatives in the online basics training from 20 different countries. And that is just incredible right now. And to think about the fact that, for me anyway, because I co-teach the level 1, the online basics training with Brad, to think about the fact that there's now 2 people in Romania who will be NARM informed. There's now people in India and in so many countries that are NARM informed, and then they send people. So there's more and more and more. And just to think about the ripple effect of that all over the world, which is something that I do not think that we would be in this position without the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty amazing.
Brad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to add just, I can speak from my experience, although I've heard this being reflected by a lot of people, is when we first went into kind of isolation, social distancing back in March and April, many of us were working from home, and the ability to have this connection, and there's many levels of it. It's not just being together on the screen, but it's also the learning, the growth, being together when there's challenges. Some of our friends were getting sick with COVID, or just the uncertainties about being laid off. And, of course, in the United States, there was a lot of social unrest that was happening that we were supporting each other through and learning from. So it's weird, because the silver lining of the pandemic was that actually, in some ways, it really increased our capacity for social connection and engagement. And I think that, beyond just the growth that Stefanie mentioned, which is also super exciting, it's also just the depth depth of connection. For me, it was like the biggest resource. I told this story in one of my trainings that this is probably like 6 months after. In California, things that were really shut down. And so people were back not in school still and all that kind of stuff. And we were on a hike and I ran into some friends that actually lived close to us. And one's a teacher, one worked for a nonprofit. And we spent about a half an hour, in distance in nature chatting because it was a kind of an awkward situation. We hadn't been in a social situation like that in a long time. So they were excited. We were excited. And they spent like 20 minutes, like really venting very much about all of the pain and the distress. It felt very negative, like what they were experiencing. As I was walking away, I said to my wife, I said, like, I felt almost guilty because I have the best job in the world. Every weekend, I get to be with people from all around the world and not only get to be with them, but get to do this really heart-centered growth work. And I know also that it has all these ripple effects as well. And so it was just a really interesting experience. Like so much suffering was happening. And yet something that was happening here as we stayed connected was just such an incredible resource. Mm-hmm. Marcia, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
What's touched me in a way is how all of this has also impacted on the NARM community, the wider community, that NARM, it supports a lot of inclusivity and it's unifying in a lot of ways because it speaks to sort of deep dimensions of the human experience. And at the same time, it really honors the individual differences. That's where, the Pillar 1 contracting comes in. And to me, it's been so profound working with a spiritual director in Abu Dhabi or, a body worker in Australia or an osteopath in New York City. And so many people have said they had all these other models before they came to NARM, and that NARM has this way of kind of bringing together a lot of what they've learned in other models in a sort of cohesive way. And I think the podcast speaks to that. We often bring in like Richard Schwartz or, Gabor Mate, and we're looking for what do we have in common and how might our differences support each other. And I feel like that's such a quality of the NARM community, and it's only gotten more so over the year that we've been able to bring in more people and added to the sort of the heartfulness, I think, of holding all of these differences while also finding how much of it we have in common. So that has been a really profound aspect of it to me, this growth over the last year.
Emily, I have a question for you, which is you and I met in person. And the idea was after we met, you were going to join a training that we were going to do together the next month in person in Arizona, probably pretty close to your house. And then all of a sudden that didn't happen. And your whole training was online. Like you and I met once, but many of the people you went through the training with, you never met in person. And I'm curious from your perspective, like being someone that had that experience, what has that been like for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Because I think in the beginning, there definitely was some grief of like, oh, I really wanted to be with these amazing humans in person. I really, really yearned for that. But one of the cool things is like, as we went through the training, I kind of forgot I hadn't met a lot of the folks in person. Like I just forgot that. In fact, I'm still in touch with several in my cohort. We meet weekly, a lot of us. And it's just been so cool that I feel like I've met them in person. It was much more seamless than I thought it would be. So initially there was that grief, but then also I think maybe the beauty has been that we have stayed so connected. And I don't know, I hadn't experienced a NARM training prior to that where it was different. And so I don't know how different it would have been, but there's part of me that I wonder if we've stayed so connected because that was how we initially connected, was online. And so it's just been so seamless. We meet every week. So that's been really cool.
I like hearing that from the perspective of a student who went through the process all online, because from the perspective of trainers and TAs and consultants, we're often talking about how kind of blown away we are that the heartfulness of the model and the depth of the model comes through, and people really seem to feel it and are impacted by it in the little Zoom boxes that we meet them in. And that's amazing that it can sort of penetrate. And at the same time, we also always have these conversations about how we miss, what happens at the snack table, or just that all of that natural flow. And it's a little harder to feel like we know everybody, A, because the trainings have gotten bigger, there's a lot of demand, and B, because we don't have that physical time in person. And it makes me think about the way we hold different experiences internally from a NARM perspective is, our approach is to hold both the grief with the joy, and they actually enrich each other, that the more that we have the capacity to feel the grief that you mentioned, the loss, whatever, the anger, all the different feelings that human beings consider more uncomfortable, more difficult, the more capacity we have to also experience and receive the feelings that feel more pleasant. So just reflecting on that from an NARM perspective.
Yeah, it's funny too, because now I'm thinking about how a few of us did actually get to meet in person just a couple months ago. One was passing through town. And so one kind of made a little bit of a drive and I made a little bit of a drive and we met. And I was a little worried that I would feel super awkward because we had only ever met online. And it wasn't at all. It was so beautiful to be able to be with each other and connect. And so I think that just really speaks to how seamless it's been for many of us in this process.
I think that speaks to some of the aspects of our training, how we do the training that embody what we are teaching, in that we have these elements that are like, we have a monologue often where two people come together and may just share heartfully with just being listened to and some deep connection. For some people have never had that, just being able to be listened to without interruption or judgment. And then we have triads where people maybe have more of a dialogue in a small group, or we have these active coaching experiences where we focus actually on the experience of each of the people. We're not just teaching them how to do something. We're having people focus on what it's like to be in it and to share their experience or reflect. Brad often does these, and Stefanie, these reflective exercises. And I think that really helps to create more of a sense of connection and a personal involvement than maybe some of the webinars and things that I've been to myself and other teachings, so that you almost feel, I know in my breakout groups, I feel like I've met these people in person. I kind of forget. Some of them I've never seen them actually outside of a Zoom screen. Very touching, actually.
Yeah, I think what Marcia's saying also speaks, which we never have had really a chance to talk on the podcast so much about this, but just like what the mission and vision of this institute really is, which is a community. I mean, so many of us work on islands with very complex clients and families and complex communities and settings. And in fact, a lot of the quote support that we receive is often not very supportive. And so here we come to have a place that we come for learning. We come to be in community. We come to expand, different ideas and how we apply it in research and advocacy and all that kind of thing. And it feels like we've moved away from these institutes where people have a professional home. They have a professional community. And, I'm kind of a nerd on these things. I study all the different psychological models. And in the early days, the reason why psychoanalysis became so big is because they had in each city an institute, and the institute became a professional home. And that spawned all sorts of interest and new ideas and new applications and people who refined the model and evolved it in different ways. But it also became a place where people had their connections. And I think living in a society like the United States, where just in the last 10 years, the number of people that go to practice their religion in group settings has dropped significantly. People are not connected to their extended families. Our social circles have gotten much smaller. They're replaced more by online social media outlets. So it's like our world has gotten smaller and smaller. And to have this opportunity to kind of be in community, it is one of the missions and visions. So again, I think going back to what Stefanie said before, just the way that this pandemic kind of helped elicit that and expedite our process has been really exciting.
I don't know if this brings us into the next topic or not, but as Brad was talking, it just made me also think about how clearly hungry people are for just that community, a professional home, to not be alone in this very complex work. And I know that Brad and Marcia and I really experienced that through the sheer numbers of people who reach out to us between modules for active coaching and consultation. educational consultation about this model and really just want more and more and more. And I think part of that is it is exciting to learn this model, and it's a complex model to learn. But I think part of it is just what Brad was talking about. It's that they know that there's a place they can go to be truly supported in the work that they do in the application of NARM. And that, I don't know that we knew how much we were craving that, but now we know that the pandemic has illuminated that, I think. But I think it was always there.
I would add, this sort of relates to some of the other topics that we might get into, that the specific focus that we have in NARM on the experience of the clinician as a huge part of the learning and the growth, I think adds to that hunger, because I'm sure I would say this for myself, that I get as much growth out of learning and the training and even the coaching and the teaching as I give. And I think people recognize that when they do a consultation, they're learning how to be with their clients in a way that also enhances their own connection to themselves in a meaningful way, and then often to me in that circle. And I had a student that said to me this week in a consultation that NARM was the first training that she'd had in which the therapist mattered. And I thought that was such an interesting comment, because we focus on the therapist's experience as a way to use the relational piece in NARM. But of course, to do that, we also have to explore what's something that might be coming up for us, how that relates to our own experience in ways that we get to grow. And I think that really adds to the heartfulness and the connectedness of why people are drawn to this, because they're part of it. They're not just learning how to do something, they're learning how to be in an experience that's really profound to share with another person.
And I think it's unfamiliar and even scary to some therapists. It's interesting, because, the three of us do so many consultations and supervision for different therapists. And it's just so common that a therapist will come in and immediately want to start focusing on the client. And it makes sense, because that client they're having some kind of challenge with that client, or they're confused or need some support. But by definition, the way that they're relating, even how they think about that client, is being filtered by the person. So if you had 10 different therapists, they'd all have 10 different experiences of that one client. And so for me, I don't think you can do consultation or supervision with therapists without starting from how this is actually impacting the therapists internally for themselves, because that is going to help us illuminate then how we're organizing ourselves in relationship to our clients. And some of the obstacles that we might be feeling coming externally might also be partly because of how we're responding internally. And when people start to understand that, it gives them a lot more sense of agency, a lot more sense of hope. It's like, oh, maybe it's not all about this client is hopeless or they're creating all this difficulty or stuckness, but it also could be about how this client is triggering things internally for me that I actually can learn about. And that can be part of the relational healing that we're doing with our clients.
Brad, I'm just taking this in again, thinking of it from a student perspective. That really was what I was drawn to with NARM, because I discovered, I think, your free webinar. I had just started school. I was kind of in the middle of my program, and I had really been researching, as a grad student, you get discounts on any kind of training you do. So I had just looked at everything and kind of was making plans about what I wanted to dive into. And I found that webinar, and I was really pulled to exactly what you just named, feeling like this is something where I can show up. I'm a human. I'm in the room. My experience is important. I was so drawn to that because that felt I was missing that in other things that I had looked at. So I'm just taking that in, everything that you just said. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Stefanie now has taken over the intro webinars from me. And one of the things she does in these is to show an active coaching demonstration. So most people who are listening to this won't know what that means. And so it's something that Marcia, Stefanie, and I do all the time. And I think I'm speaking for all of us. We love it. And I think the students, you'll have to tell us, Emily, but I think the students really love it. I loved it when Larry did it with me too, which is that we have a client, we have a therapist. These are usually two students in our trainings. And the trainer is coaching the therapist as they're working with the student. And a big part of the focus is about the therapist's experience of being with another human being. So secondarily, we focus on all the interventions, the skills, but primarily it's about supporting the human in that role of a therapist in that moment. And it's dynamic, it's exciting. It feels, again, I can't speak for everyone, but it feels very supportive. And instead of, the educational trauma that we've all experienced where someone's like behind a one-way mirror or has a little earpiece and is getting a lot of like barking at them, this is really like a collaborative process where we are really wanting to understand how it is for the therapist so that we can be more available for supporting the client.
Yeah, exactly.
Marcia, Stefanie, anything you wanted to add about the active coaching? I just know that's something that we really, I think, have all enjoyed and the students are getting a lot out of it.
I think it's just a powerful, like a parallel process, because we also view the work with clients as collaborative, that we're not coming in as the expert to fix them. We're coming in kind of as fellow travelers on the trail, so to speak. And in that, just like in the active coaching, we ask the student to share what they're experiencing. We share our experience sometimes as active coaches as, I'm not sure whether to do this or that. And it models, as the therapist, the possibility of being able to say, so I'm of two minds, or, to include the client in a way that supports their agency and where we can even at times even bring in our own experience, whether explicitly or implicitly. I had a consult this week where a student was talking about being stuck, where she was describing that almost everything she offered the client was dismissive of. And the therapist consultee was saying, I felt really frustrated and diminished by that. And so we were able to look at, well, her experience was partly a clue to some of her own history, but it also was probably a way for her to know what the client was experiencing in her own family of origin. And once we did that, it just opened it up. It's like, oh, her parents dismiss everything that she offers. And so she feels helpless and powerless and frustrated, but she can't direct that towards the parents. So she just shuts down herself. And that use of that, what's your experience, is such a huge part of what we teach.
There's also this really beautiful, I don't know if macro thing that's happening when we're active coaching that people often comment on, which is, the whole institute and the whole training model is built on mentoring and all these different levels of mentorship. And there's something really kind of profound that happens. Brad often describes it as there's like almost a grandparent in the active coach role with a parent in the therapist role with, of course, there's no child in the room where we're doing this with an adult, but with somebody who's receiving support. So it's almost like multi-generation family. And there's something so powerful that the person in the client role will often comment on, that is when they hear these two people working together to support them. And also when they see the kind of the grandparent and the trainer supporting the parent in reflecting on their own experience, something really settles for the student. And I think what we've inadvertently created are some of the ingredients of secure attachment. Sometimes people often comment that they wish that all therapy could be done that way, because they'll sit for like sometimes 10 minutes, hearing this conversation going on between the trainer and the therapist. And that becomes almost more impactful for them than anything else for the person in the client role. I hope this is making sense as I describe it, because it's like, what would our lives be like if parents had the support they needed from their parents, because their parents had the support they needed for their parents? The child would have been okay. And that just lands very powerfully through this active coaching model.
Yeah, Stefanie, I was feeling just really touched as you were talking about that, because that was absolutely my experience, completely my experience. As I was watching the active coaching, I felt so supportive as I was sitting in the client role. Really beautiful.
Yeah. And, now we're getting into some personal territory, but all four of us are parents, and we all have different relationships with our parents and how they were as support or not support for us as parents, and how they were support or not support for our kids, their grandchildren. And I think there is, when Stefanie, you were saying this, I felt touched about that too, because I think that is part of what ends up happening around educational trauma. Like, therapists are some of the most dedicated people in the world. They're spending a lot of time, a lot of money to come into a training like ours. And we want to do the absolute best we can to support them. And yet they have all of these strategies they've had to develop. We've all had to develop to just manage all of the fear and the shame that we received growing up about learning things before we've even been taught them, and all of the different pressures that we've experienced, that we've internalized. And I think it's another element of some of the transformation that happens for therapists that come into our training. They're just signing up thinking they're going to learn this new model for working with complex trauma. And then here they come bumping right up against these very deep and often unconscious patterns. People in our training are talking about how much pressure they're putting on themselves, how they're working so hard. Their minds, by the end of these weekends, their brains are so fried because they're trying to figure it all out, which is often a disconnection from them just being able to be present in their bodies and in their experience and in their relationship. And I really think a lot of this is because of the educational trauma that we have all experienced. And so there's another element of what we're trying to create here that, again, as Stefanie said before, it's amazing how nice this kind of transitioned over to doing this online, is just the way that we are really all in this learning together. I mean, Stefanie, Marcia, and I, we're the lead trainers of this institute. The three of us are consulting all the time about the challenges that we're having and providing mentorship and support for each other. And Larry also has provided mentorship for us over the years as well. So it's like we're all doing the same thing at the same time. And hopefully that does start to ripple into our clients and into their lives as well.
Marcia, you told a story recently about a conversation you had with Brad when you were about to go into a training.
I was just thinking about that.
It's the one about you asked him how to prepare.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that because it comes from my own learning kind of experience where we were going to do a TA training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Brad had laid it all out, the slides and everything. And you and I were going over them. And I wanted to go to the internet and find the glossary of terms. I thought, I'll just go, some of these I want to get it right. And Brad was like, no, don't. And I was frustrated, and I let myself feel that. And he was so great. Brad, you were great with my, just kind of sitting with my, I want to go learn. I want to be prepared. And finally, I sort of got it. No, actually, that's the old model. You just were inviting me to sit in the not knowing and the uncertainty. And I can feel emotional even saying that. We have to be able to do that, actually. We're expecting our clients to be able to sit in really painful states, on the way. And if we can't sit with those states of confusion and uncertainty and not knowing, and for me, even pain, to be told, no, don't do this strategy that you use to prepare yourself. And it was so powerful just to go to the training and not knowing and just be in the not knowing with everybody, including the TAs that were in the training. And so much more came out of that for me.
Yeah.
Including the capacity to sit in uncertainty and some degree of suffering and moving in a different direction than my normal preparation. And so a little bit of walking the walk of what we try to teach our students there.
When you use the word powerful, and I think that is such a big piece of this model, is understanding that not only is not knowing something that as human beings we have to tolerate, but it's also there's so much power in not knowing, letting ourselves have these, we call them in NARM, beginner's minds, and be open to the experience in the present moment rather than protecting ourselves with all these strategies. That's powerful. Like you just said, Marcia, what can open up when we can show up with a client in not knowing, show up with ourselves in not knowing.
And our own vulnerability. I mean, there's something that's so deeply opening in terms of connection from that place with another human being. And I think that's one of the things that's so enlivening about this work. I mean, I've been in practice for over 40 years and been through many, many different trainings. And I would say that at this point, partly because of the community, Brad, you were talking to that we're creating and how meaningful that is, and partly because of the model and how it really keeps focusing us on our own growth. It is probably the most enlivening time that I've had in my 4 years of working. Like, I'm not tired. I feel excited when I go to work.
It makes me think about some of these old strategies you said that, you were learning to sit with in a new way. And I think I can't speak for you, Emily. I haven't talked to you enough about it, but I know for the three of us, these last years in NARM, that's all it's been. It's been about challenging these old strategies. And every day we're waking up, making the decision to continue to be with that experience. Some days are easier than others. But I was just thinking about, like, when we were talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion training, it's like so much of that old trauma is about getting it right. And I am really deepening into this acceptance that we will never get it right. It doesn't even make sense that we'll ever get it right. It's all a process of learning. And if we can bring that humility and vulnerability, then there's no end to the learning. And I believe that it doesn't just exist in that area of learning around diversity, but it also in terms of our clients and in terms of our own growth. You've heard me tell the story in classes because I always think it's funny. I've had clients that are 18 years old and 80 years old say the same thing. They'll get to this point where they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that I haven't known this already. Like, I've been doing all this work. It doesn't matter if you're 18 or 80, there's always going to be more work. And that's exciting from my perspective. There's the deepening of that. There's how we can learn as our strategies start to quiet down, how to be more expansive and have greater capacity.
Brad, can I just say as a NARM student, how settling that has been to hear you kind of teach that. And it's really helped me just shift into a different perspective of being excited that, oh, this is another area of potential growth, instead of shaming myself for, oh, I should have already known that, or I should have done it this way or said that or whatever, to just be open to the possibility of like, oh, wow, this is a new area I get to expand in. It's so nice. And I feel so fortunate that I'm finding this at, basically the beginning of my career, because I feel like it's just going to help me go in a direction of having more space to learn all of that. I just love it.
Yeah, I often feel jealous, Emily, of people who get to learn this at the beginning of their careers. And I notice how hard it is. I mean, I was in practice for a solid 15 years before finding NARM, and a somatic model a few years before that, thank goodness, in somatic experiencing. But there's so much undoing and kind of unraveling of the ways that we've learned to be in this role through, as Brad was saying before, through so much pressure, through so much willing and efforting, which then, of course, we all know as NARM learners, harkens back to what attracted many of us to this role in the first place, the way that we had to, in our own early development, attune to others. And, many of us grew up being those people in our world who, were there for everybody else and got really good at it. So just thinking about how all of that links, I could go even further to the intergenerational of all of that, but there's no end backwards or forwards. I mean, as Brad was just saying, this is our life's work to keep learning and to keep growing. And also as we're doing that, we're healing backwards. We're healing these intergenerational patterns because we chose to show up and start reflecting on ourselves for whatever reason we did. And that for me, and I think for all of us, we really feel the impact of how that sort of heals the intergenerational trauma as well.
I'm curious if this takes us into the territory of reflecting on, what's been personally and professionally most impacting this last year in working in the NARM space. What's been the most fulfilling thing for all of you?
For me, it's definitely the most fulfilling thing has been the interaction with students through consultation and active coaching. The being able to be in that role. And I think Marcia was saying this, I learn every time. something for me. But whether it's doing the group case consults where maybe 8 or 9 people get to share something and everybody is a part of that learning with them. There's all this vicarious learning, or whether it's these small active coaching groups where there's this combination of learning and kind of levels of support I was talking about. And also people are working with material that gets in the way for them in their lives at the same time. So there's so much happening. And I really also feel very fulfilled by the one-on-one consultation that I get to do, where something lands in a different way, something that they've learned or heard, and they're struggling with applying it. And then, when that lands and I feel the relief of that, and I get to see that settling that happens for them, and they get to go back into their work from a new place inside, for me, that's the most fulfilling.
I would echo that. I mean, for me, it's definitely in the connections. And one of the things in the active coaching is that, we were talking about the coach to the student practitioner to the student client, but there's also the rest of the group, whether it's a small group of 3 or 4, or whether it's a group, a little bit larger breakup group, that's in the resonance. And it's been incredible to see how when people witness a sort of heartful experience, that the people who are watching and tracking are opened up and will talk about how they got something out of it, or if they're doing the next practice, it opens up something even deeper for them. And I had an active coaching last weekend with 3 graduates. And I mean, at the end, I think we were all crying. I mean, it was so profoundly moving. And each one built upon the other in like a really kind of, it was like a flow, because of staying with that openness, the vulnerability, the curiosity, the spaciousness. Even within the group, there were some differences between, how people were orienting to some aspects of the pandemic, and yet being able to hold those with such tenderness. It was really very moving, and kind of, I felt enlivened by it, not just for the rest of the day, but, throughout the week, to have been touched in that way by that connection to the 3 people that I was working with and within myself.
Yeah, I think for me, it's exactly the same. It's funny because when you tell someone, or when I tell someone that what I do for a living, I'm a trauma therapist and trainer, people that aren't in this profession are like, whoa. And then I tell them almost every weekend for the last 2.5 years, I have been in a trauma training. And then people are like, whoa, really interesting responses that people will have to me. And I wish I could really articulate how exciting and fulfilling these experiences are. Oftentimes, I'm tired at the end of the weekend, but I could spend the rest of the week continuing to be in this group. A lot of people like to go to football games on the weekend, or like to go to the theater. And for me to have this opportunity to be with people that are interested in learning and healing and depth and connection and vulnerability, challenging themselves, caring about the world. And I mean, all of these things happen in one place. It's pretty dynamic. And then on top of it, it's also professional, which means that we're all enhancing our skills. And for me, I look at therapy as a craft. And I'm always, since I got into this field, probably before I got in this field, I was already enhancing some of my skills. And for me, this is so fulfilling to be having these opportunities to become more refined and sophisticated in this kind of work. So I find it incredibly fulfilling.
I love that. Yeah, I'm just thinking about, over the weekend, I was watching a documentary on trauma, and my 2 older boys, I've got a 14 and 11-year-old, and they came in and they sat next to me and they got into it. They were really interested. And I'm just thinking about how all of this has been informing my parenting, how I'm showing up as a mother in a different way that's been really satisfying and fun. So yeah, I appreciate hearing that from all of you. What's been the most challenging parts?
I can start with this because I'm in the middle of finishing a book right now that will be coming out next year. It has 2 sides of it. One side is part of my mission, part of my passion is about making this work more accessible so that people can find this work, don't have to come and spend weekends and spend money to come to a training. They can, hopefully start to really understand some of these principles and start to apply them just from this book. That's my hope. But the other side of it is that I've been sitting with my own I'll call it educational trauma. I mean, my perfectionism, the pressure I put on myself, how I work so hard, and sitting with my own internal processes. I'm trying to write this book has been incredibly painful. And also, again, I've learned a lot through that process. So it is challenging to really deepen into this model because it's an invitation to go to the next obstacles internally. So on some level, I love having that opportunity. And on another level, if you would have talked to me last week when I was on my week away writing, which Marcia and Stefanie did talk to me, I wasn't in the same headspace because I was really pushing my edges around my own trauma. And that is challenging. And it's also where the work is. So I think for me, that's part of how I really empathize with students that come into our training because they're getting challenged in big ways. And you know what? They're going to go back and use NARM to challenge their clients too. And so the fact that we're able to sit with both sides of it is going to, again, have this ripple effect. So that, at least that's the story I tell about it.
Yeah.
I would say that for me, like, I guess this is really, in essence, what you're saying, Brad, about yourself. The challenges are also the gifts. You know, the challenges for me are where I come up against my learning edges or my own sort of personal kind of places where it's hard to let go. I mean, I have really learned that less is more, you know, so saying less is actually, and trusting in the allowing more to arise from the client or the student. I mean, that's always, being an oldest child and sort of responsible one, doing more was always really a good idea. And sort of sit back and then to recognize, gosh, it's so different to work less hard and to trust more in the process. And that if we get out of the way or help the client get things out of the way, their own natural life force will come forth. So it's when I get sort of challenged by, sitting in really unbearable states, like helplessness. There's been so much of that during the pandemic. And rather than wanting to fix it or give something that'll make it better, just to sit in it with my clients and feel it, sometimes it's pretty hard, painful to do. But at the same time, it's opened up so much for me personally, and certainly has made my work a lot better. You were talking about your kids. I will say this, my oldest son is just finished level 2 training. And it was such an interesting experience at times during it where Brad would be teaching something and I would say, does this happen in our family? Or, how is this for you? So again, it was so exciting to share this with him. And he's just crazy about NARM. And at the same time, also like, wow, here we are talking about a model of development and growing up. And here's my kid who's, also in his own process learning. So that also was sort of humbling. And it certainly created a lot of connection that probably we wouldn't have had before. But it also made me look at things too that I might not have looked at otherwise. So, the challenges are often the portals to new things.
We definitely don't grow when we're comfortable. So I could go on this topic of the challenges. There's so many challenges. For me, I'm thinking first and foremost of the challenges of being a human being at this time. And not just the COVID of it, but all of the different things that are going on around us. I'm thinking about, just like climate change and the things that that's bringing. It's been more than once that Brad has been teaching at the same time as waiting to see if he has to evacuate because of a fire. This is a challenging time to just be a human on so many levels. The heartbreaking things that are happening around us all the time. And in this past 2 years, the things that have made the social justice movement come up and out in such a big way right now have been heartbreaking and horrific. Things that are happening all over the world. So it's challenging to be a human being. And then on top of being a human being, my role as a human being, I still have a practice. So my role is to support other human beings who are going through the exact same things that I'm going through. And that's very different for a therapist. Sometimes we're working with people who are going through something that we've gone through, but this is different. This is very different. So that's very challenging. And then I want to add just professionally, because that was more professionally, like Brad's book is a step for him. I'm newer to teaching, and my educational trauma and my strategies to pressure myself have to do with being like somebody else. Like, how do I teach this model that Larry created that's so brilliant and incredible, but I can't do it like Larry, and I can't do it like Brad, who's been teaching for 25 years when I haven't. So how do I embrace teaching this model as me? That's been an important challenge and a painful challenge. So painful at times that I just had a birthday. I just turned 55. And in our family, we write songs for each other, satirical songs. We make fun of each other. And so my husband wrote a song about NARM and my relationship to NARM and all the times that I run out of my bedroom office screaming about how I can't do something or I'm not going to do it well enough. And so I was so surprised by it because this wasn't, it's not something we do every birthday. It's for big birthdays, but he put his heart and soul into a song about NARM because of how much he has to hear about it.
Oh, I love that.
How about you, Emily? Any challenge for you?
Well, I don't know. You all kind of have named little bits and pieces of what I'm just getting a flavor for, just a taste of, since I'm really at the beginning of my work in this way. But, I'm kind of at the starting line of like, okay, I'm not pressuring myself. I'm just like showing up as a human. And I must say that, Marcia, I'm just getting to know you, but with Brad and Stefanie, what I've really enjoyed in the interactions that we've had and in the trainings I've been in is you're both able to just show up as humans. And that has given me permission. I feel like I can give myself permission to just show up and be a human. I mean, even in this new role and with this podcast, kind of gearing up for this, I was like, I'm just going to show up and be myself. And maybe I won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I get to just be me. This is the only person I know how to be. So I would say that's pushing my edges in a way that feels new and good. It's kind of refreshing to be able to just show up and be me. So, yeah.
So touching.
Yeah.
That's so nice.
So I'm curious, what's in the future as we look ahead to 2022? What's on the horizon?
Well, you doing all kinds of really cool podcasts. Yeah, really excited about that. We have a great a year planned with all kinds of really interesting guests from within NARM and also people that will continue to be having conversations from outside of NARM. We're excited about that. And I'll let Stefanie and Marcia answer for themselves. But for me, I am feeling good about this book that will be coming out next year. Again, the mission is to bring NARM out into the world. And then I'm going to continue learning for myself about how to make these trainings better and how to make our institute better. And for myself, just continuing my own personal work as well. 2022.
Well, one big change that's happening in 2022 for me is that Brad and I have been co-teaching the online basics training, and I'm going to be teaching that on my own in 2022 for the first time, which is exciting. And, also a step. It's also growth. It brings challenges with it. Brad has been a really incredible resource and mentor to me in finding myself as a teacher. And also just in learning all the things that one learns in 25 years of how to hold a group. So I'm excited and obviously a little nervous about that leap, but mostly excited. And, we're really hoping in 2022 that we're finally going to be able to bring people back together in person. And we've also really learned that there are many people that say to us, I would have never been able to take this training if I couldn't take it online. And so our whole model has changed. And we're really thinking in the future about hybrid, where we'll be live streaming so people can participate if they can't travel or just it can make it more affordable for people to not have to travel. So that's amazing. And then we can still be available to more local communities or people who want to travel to have that in-person experience. Obviously, as an institute, that's going to be a lot to navigate and learn how to do smoothly, but we learned how to move this whole thing online. So we definitely can learn how to have a smooth hybrid class. And I'm very excited about the potential there.
I love it.
I'm excited and nervous about that because of co-piloting the master's class next year, which is planned to be hybrid, and just going as the lead assistant. How are we going to do this? How's this going to work? It's been great is asking students. A lot of students, my son who teaches in graduate school, just other people are out there to kind of give support and ideas, but that's going to be certainly a growth edge. I was looking forward to the San Francisco training is sort of, I'm the co-parent to Brad of the San Francisco training, and we didn't get to do that in person this year, so that was kind of sad. I'm hoping that we get to do the master's class in person as well as hybrid, but that's going to be a learning challenge for me. But Brad's always great about pushing me to be able to think that I can do more than I think I can do, including we've added, I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, I don't think so. In addition to the consult group, we've added this active coaching consult group that's going to start in November and that all three of us are going to do. Brad's leading the charge there on that. But again, that's a growth edge for me. I haven't done that before. So it's kind of pushing myself to be in the unknown and to be in uncertainty and not run to the internet to prepare for 20 hours beforehand. So anyways, it always turns out so great. I'll go into those consults thinking, I wonder how I have 50 people or something in the one tomorrow, just a huge group. And I'm like, wow. And it's such a rich group. It always is. I walk away going, that was great. Even though in the beginning I'm thinking, what am I going to do to entertain these people for 2 hours? So that's
tap dance, Marcia.
That's my growth edge right there. Yeah.
I love it. Well, as we kind of wrap up our time together, I wonder if there was any final thoughts any of you had.
It's just really enriching to be here together, the four of us, and to reflect in this way. It just reminds me of how important it is to pause and to make space to see where you are. I mean, I was like, okay, this is in my date book, like do the podcast, right? But, then you do it, and I've just gotten so much out of it. So I'm appreciating that right now.
I would just say, to me, probably in this moment, the most meaningful thing is being here. And thank you, Emily, for making this possible with Brad and Stefanie. I mean, the two of you have been like together with me in this journey since the very beginning. And there have been challenging times when I think Stefanie, you used the term, we're building the plane while we're flying it, and so much demand. And sometimes we can barely talk to each other because we're so busy. And yet sometimes, to be honest, the thing that is the strongest glue for me is how much I care for the two of you and how meaningful it is to be in this journey together. And in this moment, I'm just kind of feeling that kind of boils down to, it's been like 10 years or something. And you're both just super important to me. And it's just so sweet to be here and kind of celebrate and, to appreciate both of you, what you've done to get us here. So feeling a lot of gratitude.
Thanks, Marcia. I was feeling into the same thing, just like how, the three of us have this deep heart connection, and now we get to include Emily in this, and just really, again, happy that we had a chance to do this. I hope we'll do this again, maybe later in the year or the following year. And Emily, just welcome again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. If you're a licensed mental health practitioner, we invite you to join us for the Level 2 NARM Therapist training beginning on January 20th. In this training, you will learn a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/level2online. For all other helping professionals, we invite you to join us for the Level 1 NARM Online Basics training starting February 4th. In this online training, participants will learn more about the changing field of trauma, the framework of the NARM approach, and how NARM, one of the first models specifically designed to address CPTSD, can support professionals in the growing trauma-informed field. If you are looking for more advanced training in understanding the impacts of attachment, relational, developmental, cultural, and intergenerational trauma, join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.